extremely interesting. So for those of you who want to ask questions, I'll take about 4 in the first go.
Hello, I'm Bihong Huang from ADB Institute. All the presentations are very interesting. My first question is about education quality. I'm very pleased to know that India made very progress in terms of literacy rate and also enrollment rate. But I know that actually education quality varies a lot across country, like for example in terms of PISA score. So my question first is, how is the education quality in India? I mean, comparing with international standard, and what is the main reason? Second is about the future skill and knowledge. I mean, for the future work, you classify into different kinds of skill: cognitive, non-cognitive, manual, and non-manual. So I feel that in terms of education, we need to adjust the school curriculum. From now on, I mean, even like from the primary education, the curriculum need to be adjusted because traditional education may focus a lot on like practice, memory, repetition. Such kind of skill may not meet future challenges. So what is India's strategy in terms of curriculum adjustment? Thanks.
Hi, my name is Catherine. I work with Just Jobs Network as a research associate. So our organization works around the length and breadth of labor and employment, and the future of work is very much a part of our core issues. Mr. ICRIER, you mentioned about global inequality in this digital era. Dr. Santosh mentioned about the challenge of late industrializers. So my question is, how great is the danger of monopolization of technological advancement in favor of these developed countries, owing to globalization and the interdependence of the global economy?
Yeah, you had talked about reskilling. Now, how realistic is that? Because most of the professions which are at very high risk of being eliminated are the knowledge workers and the gold-collar workers, such as the professions at risk are radiologists, pathologists, chartered accountants, legal researchers, software coders, integrated circuit designers, telecom network designers. These are the jobs that are really going out of, are just going away because of artificial intelligence. So do you really think that reskilling, especially because the knowledge workers are much more at risk as compared to a medium-skilled worker? Because let's say in healthcare, the demand is for nurses and physiotherapists, and it's not so much for radiologists whose jobs are going to be disappearing in the next 10 years.
Thank you. And just one last question. Okay.
My name is P.K.P. Shina. I am from MIT School of Natural Resources and Sustainable Development. My question is that the time has come when you have to reinvent the way we think. The green collar economy, low carbon economy will create much more jobs than what we are doing at present, number one. Number two, that definition of GDP, it has to change. Because if you cut all the forest, the rate of growth will go 500%. But will it be real growth? So my question to all the economists here is that there should be a ratio per capita GDP by per capita carbon emission.
Thank you.
And that should be for the whole world also.
Thank you, sir. Can I now request the panelists to respond in any particular order? Professor Malhotra first.
Srinivas, why don't you take the question from the lady on Just Jobs, and let me respond to Dr. Huang. You asked two questions, one about education quality and the other was about curriculum. So on quality, let me make 2 points. One, we know that let me first talk about the higher education system. The higher education system quality is highly skewed because you have a very large number of institutions with poor quality, and then you have still a reasonably large number of institutions which have very high quality, which are of global standards. And I think you know the names of those institutions. They are fairly well known globally. How do we deal with this problem? There are multiple solutions which I don't think we have a time to go into, but I believe that given the challenge that our economy and most EMEs face in respect of technological upgradation and the rapidity with which our own economy and most economies are diversifying, it's absolutely critical that having achieved pretty universal secondary education across a vast country, and universal including with gender parity, and I think we need to sort of emphasize this because at our level of per capita income, most countries have not managed to achieve gender parity at secondary level. So we are facing a particular challenge. We cannot allow more and more 15, 16-year-olds to continue into higher secondary and then into tertiary education for want of anything else to do. What is critical, and I think we've got to learn in this regard from the East Asians, including your own country. I assume that you're from Vietnam. The point is that what we need to do is that more of these young people who've gotten general academic secondary education need to be diverted towards vocational education and vocational training, which must be backed by industry engagement. This is the other challenge to improve the quality of our vocational education and training, which sort of in a sense brings me to your second question about curriculum. Again, taking the stylized facts that Marges was talking about, organized sector versus unorganized sector. We have a reasonably large organized sector by global standards. Let's talk of the IT sector. The IT sector is very big, certainly by global standards. And how is it coping with IR4 technologies? The way it is coping is essentially to begin to reskill its own workers. Yes, it is letting off workers. It's happening on a reasonably large scale, but it's also learned that it must reskill in-house, in-firm. But there is a larger problem of curriculum irrelevance, which actually feeds into the poor quality of our graduates, whether it is from the higher secondary or the tertiary education system, which is the following. And I'm here really focusing on the TVET part, meaning the vocational education intake. Unfortunately, like so many other developing countries, our skill ecosystem has tended to be supply-driven, government-driven, and not demand-driven, not industry-driven. And if we manage to engage industry, and there are ways to do it, then this system can be sort of changed around. And that would actually improve both the quality as well as the employability of our young graduates.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is in response to the question asked by the lady from Just Jobs Network. Technological advances, it's a very complex thing. And if we look at some of the leading firms in the world which dominate technological change, there are broadly two forms. One is organic, that which is developed within, and the other is sort of buyouts. When the buyouts take two forms, you buy out entire companies along with whatever technologies they develop, or you also buy in individuals. Now, their monopolization is clearly both a function of scale, the scale at which you operate. So bigger firms tend to have an advantage in terms of offering better prices and buying up more things. And we see that. In fact, there's tremendous concern in the US on the emergence and dominance of these star firms. And so that's one way. And there, obviously, countries such as India have a distinct disadvantage. The other way is in fact the engagement of the state, and the engagement of the state is in two different ways. One is sort of deep investments in technological development, and some of that might be maybe quite far-sighted. And you had very seminal work on this by Matsukato in the UK, where she referred and she studied a lot of investments, particularly in the US and Europe, where far-sighted public sector investment in technological development could actually transform rules and in a sense be able to shift advantages so that monopolies can be broken. So that's direct investment in technological change, in technology development. And the other is where the state actually invests in broader ecosystems, essentially incubators or labs where there could be a whole lot of people who could develop patents. But the point about changing patents into something that's commercially viable is still significantly a function of size and business acumen. So it's a major challenge. Monopolizing technological change remains a huge challenge for the world.
Thank you. All right.
I just had one response to your statement. You're referring to the fourth industrial revolution, which in a sense is a little unique because it's really hollowing out the job market. So unlike the previous massive changes, here is where the set of occupations that you referred to, which are skilled, are likely to lose. And quite often, in fact, if the people actually working belong to an age cohort, it might be difficult for them to acquire skills which are of a very, very different kind. In fact, you mentioned a couple which require less of cognitive skills but more of social or interaction skills, and that jump is very often difficult to make. So I would think that the transition cost, even if there is one job created for every job destroyed, the costs of transitions are going to be very, very immense. And I am personally not very optimistic that the same set of people who lost their jobs can equally sort of whistle into new jobs. I would not think so.
Thank you very much. We've had an enormously rich set of discussions this afternoon. It's quite tricky to summarize all of them, but I will attempt to in 2 minutes. Well, to begin with, I think, while sometimes the conversation about future of work starts on a pessimistic note, what we see is that there are still opportunities which are emerging, and this is the moment to seize those opportunities. But if we have to seize those opportunities, decisive action is needed. And on that front, the issues that you brought out, Professor Mehrotra, about the industrial policy, skilling, become very important. We need to think about how we can possibly ensure universal entitlement to lifelong learning, which allows people to rescale the issues that were raised in the question and answer session also. Also, a critical issue is that, most of the workforce in India continues to rely on agriculture, continues to remain in the unorganized sector. We are likely to see significant productivity increases and movements within the unorganized sector. So the question then we need to ask is that how do we bring in decent work into the unorganized sector? We have these conversations about decent work all the time, but that conversation largely focuses on the formal sector. So how do we ensure social protection to workers in the unorganized sector? How do we increase their collective representative voice? How do we organize these workers? These are the questions that we need to start thinking of more seriously in light of some of the findings of your study. And the ILO, in fact, recently came out with a very interesting report. It's called the report of the Global Commission on the Future of Work. And they're very cognizant of this large informal sector in developing and emerging economies, and they point out to putting in place a universal labor guarantee, which actually says that regardless of the nature of contract that a worker has, he will enjoy fundamental rights at work and a decent living wage, not a minimum wage. So I think that's probably, we need to start having those kind of conversations in India as well. So we definitely need to craft our policy responses so we can ensure a world of work which has equal opportunity, social justice, and economic security. I will not use the word inclusive, Noman. But before concluding, I do want to point out that while the session is called Future of Work, and all our conversations we like to believe are on the future of work, we're in fact talking only about work for pay or profit. So we're essentially talking about employment. The issue of, unpaid family work, especially that done by women, is often ignored in this context, and I cannot help but raise this at the end of the session. So thank you all very much for a very, very fruitful session. Thank you.